It's Friday, the 17th of May, 2024.
The last word in podcasting news. This is the Pod News Weekly Review with James Cridland and Sam Sethi.
Yes, I'm James Cridland, the editor of Pod News.
And I'm Sam Sethi, the CEO of TrueFans.
In the chapters today, Spotify adds listen time to its podcast dashboard and automated transcripts and chapters. We'll talk about those. Edison Research has published its top 50 podcasts in the US, and only 1 week to go for the London Podcast Show. Plus...
This is Julie Shapiro, and I'm executive producing a few shows with Canadaland.
I'm Jesse Brown. I'm the publisher of Canadaland, and later we'll be talking about Canadaland.
Hi, this is Sam Means, co-founder of Wavlake, and I'm going to be on the show later to talk about a bunch of new stuff we've been working on, our mobile app, ticketing, a fun concert in Nashville, and some other stuff.
They will. This podcast is sponsored by Buzzsprout, podcast hosting made easy. With easy and powerful AI tools, free learning materials, remarkable customer support, and now with fan mail.
From your daily newsletter, the Pod News Weekly Review.
Right, James, let's kick off then. Spotify. Spotify has added something called consumption hours to its data dashboard. Consumption hours, James, explain.
Well, I think, and this was spotted by Dan Meisner off of Bumper, and who will be at the podcast show in London next week. And he has spotted that listen time, which is a very important stat, is essentially being now reported by Spotify within episode views in the Spotify for Podcasters dashboards. If you go in there, you can have a look at a typical episode, and it'll say something like 12,000 hours of this episode have been listened to. And that's a useful figure if you are, for example, making a branded podcast and you want to show your client what a jolly good job you're doing and everything else, then that's a very good number to give a client there. And it's a good number just to see how you're doing, because, of course, it catches whether people are skipping away from your show midway through, or it'll capture, how long people are having a listen. So it's a good number to have a look at, I think.
Yeah, the report that Bumper put out as well was that listen time might be the most important, in fact, metric that we should have. The idea is simple, according to Bumper. Audiences vote with their time and attention, and podcasters should pay attention to this metric. Now, you were on a show with Jonas Voest this week. You were on Bubble Trouble with Richard Kramer and Will Page. What was the synopsis, I guess, of the show? Because it was a really good show. I was retweeting it out. And what do we do on Mastodon? Tooting, is that still a thing on Mastodon? Do we
tooting? I think you're posting now. I think with the new version of Mastodon. But yes, the Bubble Trouble podcast is a great podcast to have a listen to. They listen to us as well, which is always good. And I was on there along with Jonas Voest talking about all kinds of things. One of the things that I was saying is that I wish we were focusing on total listen time with podcasts rather more, because, of course, the way that you make money out of shows is the time spent listened to one, particularly if you're selling advertising in there. So the more people that you have listening to advertising, but also the longer that they're listening to that particular show, the more ads you can actually go out and sell. So that's a really important number that we don't probably measure as much as we should, and it's probably because it's a bit hard to measure.
Why is it hard to measure, James? I mean, I listened to that show. You and Jones were saying very clearly, Apple has the data, Spotify now has the data, YouTube has the data. So why is it difficult to measure?
Well, yes, Apple does have the data, as do Spotify and YouTube, and they have the data, and none of those, with the exception of YouTube, none of those has an API which will actually allow you to pull that data out, and the same goes for Spotify as well. So that's a bit of a issue, really. Apple has a private API which they've allowed one company to use, which is that company that does links for your podcast, Linkfire. And that's the only company that Apple have allowed to use those stats. And those are particular stats that don't even show total listens to that particular show. Apart from that, that's it. and Spotify and Apple don't have the API for most of us, at least, into into their numbers. And I kind of wish that they would, because that would be really helpful, I think.
Yeah, well, it means that OP3 can't get it. Hosts can't get it, I assume. So look, let's say I've got my listen time and I've aggregated it all together, and I go, what do I do with my listen time? Do I go back to my client and say, oh, look, I've got X number of hours of listen time, and they'll just come back to me, and I guarantee they'll come back to me and go, yeah, but how many downloads have you got? Because they won't know. That's just going to be what happens, right?
Well, we have to, back in the early days of the internet, you or I were talking about hits to a website. And of course, a hit is a completely useless number. But we were talking about hits, and we ended up communicating to people that actually page impressions were a rather more useful figure than a hit. And in the same way, I think us being able to communicate to clients that you really shouldn't be looking at downloads anymore. You should really be looking at time spent listening, and indeed listeners. Those are the two numbers that really matter, rather than just a download number. I think the more that we can do that, the better. You and I have talked about listen time for probably more than 2 years, I think, if I think back. And one of the things that we added as an interesting additional metric was percent completed, especially for something like Pod News Daily. Because if you took Pod News Daily and went to somebody and said, yes, I've got 12 minutes of listen time. Yes. And then somebody came along and went, I've got 4 hours of listen time. It would sound like the 4-hour show was much better than yours. But actually, if the percent completed on your shows was 100% and the percent completed was only 15% on the other shows, then clearly that's a better metric. So I think we have to complement listen time with percent completed. Yes, no, I would agree. And I think, there are a lot of stats out there. The difficulty, of course, with all of these are that these stats, these more advanced stats, are baked into the podcast apps, and some podcast apps won't ever give us those numbers. Some podcast apps might be keeping those numbers, some podcast apps aren't. And I think that that's the difficulty of all of this. But I would love to see more overall numbers for just the same as we have in the radio world of total hours listened to the radio. I would love to see total hours listened to podcasting as a total. We're reaching a point, I think, where the amount of people listening to podcasts is only going to slow down now. We're about 45% or so. That's not going to grow particularly fast anymore. But the thing that we should be focusing on is time spent listening. And that isn't a number that is easy to come by. There are some people producing those types of numbers. Edison Research's Infinite Dial is doing some of that. In the UK, Rajar's Midas survey is doing some of that. There's just been some data here in Australia as well. But I think it would be a much more useful number to be fixated on, rather than just having a look at raw number of people tuning into a podcast. Now, last week we talked about this, and I don't think we've got an answer. So we interviewed Mark Asquith a couple of weeks ago, and one of the conversation pieces that me and Mark talked about was how could they get the data which Apple is sitting on and doing nothing with? Could they give any host that supports delegated delivery, so a partner of Apple, some of this data, like they give Linkfire? That would be a good first step. But the other thing, James, is hosts can't understand or know about listen time percent completed. So they will continue to promote downloads because that's the only metric they can do. And therefore, if they can't get any other data, that's the only analytics in their dashboard. It's like, what app did you use? What country was it? And how many downloads? So hosts dominate the industry, and therefore they're going to perpetuate downloads as a metric because they have no other metric. Yeah, indeed. And while that's the case, then the only thing that hosts will end up showing you is downloads and devices and all of that kind of information. Now, we shouldn't underestimate that these types of stats are really important for the industry, because actually one of the problems that the industry has is people get bored of making a podcast and then they go away. And showing them stats is a really good way to keep people with, making a show and keep people with that particular podcast host. And I think stats is good. Cross-app comments, proper cross-app comments, would also be really good as well, of actually seeing people listening to your show and then having an opinion on it. And I'm surprised that hosting companies aren't spending more time trying to work with Podcasting 2.0 to try and understand how to do decent cross-app comments. I think it's interesting that, Buzzsprout has done its fan mail thing, and that's a really good plan, but I think cross-app comments that can be seen by other people as well is a really useful tool. And I'm surprised that hosts aren't doing more of that.
Yeah, I mean, with Podcasting 2.0, and it's probably my last point on this, we have a third metric called value paid. So it'll be listen time, percent completed, and value paid. And that combined with the activity stream, which is the user-generated feed of what they're doing. So what podcast did they listen to? Who did they follow? What boost did they make? That, when it's published to, let's say, an ActivityPub endpoint, or it could be to LinkedIn, or it could be to Twitter. There is no decision that it has to be only to an ActivityPub point. That data could be shared back to hosts if the Podcasting 2.0 apps want to do that. So again, it will be in the hand of apps, not in the hand of hosts for this data.
Yeah, no, indeed. And, perhaps there's something to be said for, I don't know, if you're hosted on Buzzsprout, then maybe the comments that come in to your podcast are also hosted by Buzzsprout as well. So they've got another reason why you would like to stay with that particular podcast host, because they've got all of your old comments and stuff like that. I don't know, but I think that there's something in comments, particularly for podcast hosting companies, and I'm not sure that they've fully grasped yet how important a tool that is for customer retention, because customer retention is so much better than the cost of acquiring new customers. If you've just got a customer who's already paying you money, then keeping hold of them would seem to be, a sensible thing.
Can we officially now say rest in peace downloads? Is it time? Is it dead 2024? Can we kill it now?
No, I would imagine that it'll still be a thing for many years to come, because it's the easiest number for anybody to get hold of, unfortunately.
Right. Well, look, Spotify announced something else as well. They announced automated transcripts and automated chapters. James, what are they doing?
Yes, well, in fact, they haven't really announced it. It's just that, in fact, Kevin Finn from Buzzsprout saw that the Accidental Tech podcast on Spotify has an automated transcript, which is in the Spotify app, also has potentially automated chapters, or certainly chapters that are appearing in the app that Marco wouldn't have done, especially for Spotify. So so that was interesting. So I asked Spotify what's going on, and they said, "Oh, we're doing some tests. We're doing tests around transcription. We're doing tests around chapters." And in fact, if you go into Spotify's podcaster dashboard, there is a transcript setting which you can't turn on yet, but there is a transcript setting basically saying Spotify will make a automated transcript of this if you turn it on. I think that's the wrong way around. But also because it should be on all the time, and perhaps it will be on all the time, and you can maybe turn it off if you hate people. But I think that's kind of one thing. But I think also what they should be doing is, of course, pulling in the SRT file or the VTT file if they're capable of doing that, so that so that there's a proper creator-led transcript, and it would be a shame if they didn't end up doing that. But we know what Spotify's like, don't we?
I'm going to give you your 50p in a Tim Tam bet now. I bet you it's not a Podcasting 2.0 transcript or chapter.
I bet you it isn't either. No, I mean, it would be lovely if it was. And to an extent, there may be a legal reason why they should be showing that. And that might be an interesting conversation to have. But no, I'm absolutely positive that they won't be using any of the new Podcasting 2.0 tools for that.
Well, I will do my best to get past Spotify security through the labyrinth of people blocking you to get to them and see if I can find someone from Spotify to talk about it at the London Podcast Show. But I wouldn't hold your breath. Now,
No.
James, moving on then. Canadaland. Over in Canada, the podcast producer, Canadaland, has announced a new show this week, James. What is it?
Yes, it's called Pretendians. It focuses on Indigenous people who aren't actually Indigenous, who basically have been lying about it, which is a fascinating show. It's part of a new chapter for Canadaland.
Sorry, Pretendians. I feel like I'm one of those Pretendians.
Well, yes, but that's a little bit different. I think it's really interesting. I think the company is really interesting. They're doing some interesting things with audience support. They've been taking money from audiences for quite some time. And they've been sort of really broadening what they've been doing away from just focusing on Canada. There's nothing wrong with that, but obviously focusing on other things as well. So I thought I'd catch up with Jesse Brown from Canadaland, but also Julie Shapiro, who's been doing some work with them. And I asked Jesse what Canadaland is.
Canadaland is the first podcast network in Canada and the largest independent podcast network in Canada. We have built up a stable of podcasts focused on Canadian media, Canadian news, Canadian politics. But along the way, and we're well into our 10th year, we have also expanded into things like serialized investigative shows. We did a food show. We did a branded podcast. We sort of been here from the start of podcasting, more or less. And as such, we've sort of been forced to become kind of like a Swiss Army knife of podcasting. We've kind of taken part in all of the different formats, and we are a listener-supported network as well. Our main revenue source are direct monthly payments from our listeners.
Yeah, well, we'll dive into that in a second. You're joined by Julie Shapiro. Julie, we know you from PRX and Radiotopia. You've also been involved down here in this part of the world working with the Australian ABC. What are you doing with Canadaland?
I started working with Canadaland about a year ago when Alan Black reached out and said, hey, would you ever be interested in helping us expand the vision for what content from Canadaland might sound like? And I had a talk with him and Jesse and was really interested in what they were interested in doing, which was opening up to receiving some pitches from all over the place and trying to identify a few shows that we could work on together and support some outside producers in creating a new expansive slate of shows that would build on the Canadaland reputation and intention, but also stretch the company to new places in content making.
So you're taking and shaping pitches and developing new ideas. What sort of pitches and ideas are you looking for, Julie?
Well, we put the call out last summer, and we were pretty broad in content desires. We wanted to hear from people with solid stories. They didn't have to relate to Canada. If they did, that was interesting too, but generally we're looking for alignment in tone and merit and impact. So there wasn't a specific content mandate, but we were looking for, great storytelling, original ideas, people with chops that could make these shows, and something that would help put Canadaland even more on the map for supporting interesting, important content.
Well, perhaps part of that is the new slate for 2024, which, Jesse, you announced earlier on in the year. The first show is called Pretendians, which came out earlier this week. What's Pretendians all about if people haven't heard it yet?
It's about people who pretend to be Indigenous, which is going to be a new concept for a lot of people, but it's actually a widespread phenomenon. And it's not simply a matter of almost always white people falsely assuming a Native identity, but the people who do this are incredibly successful at it. Here in Canada, we had a very preeminent Indigenous novelist, who is probably the most famous Indigenous novelist in Canada. We had a filmmaker who was the most famous Indigenous filmmaker in Canada. And then we had a songwriter who, of course, Buffy St. Marie was one of the top songwriters in Canada, and certainly maybe the best known Indigenous songwriter in Canada. And in the course of a few years, all three were revealed to not actually be Indigenous. And we have two Indigenous co-hosts, Robert Jago and Angel Ellis, who are incredible researchers and journalists. And as luck has it, our editor-in-chief, Karen Pugliese, is Algonquin and has the expertise to kind of edit and oversee these investigations. So this is it's just a fascinating show from an Indigenous perspective. Who are these interlopers? Why do they pretend? Why are they so successful at it? How is it that they're able to go so far? And also, who are they hurting? Because when they take jobs and, positions in universities or awards that were intended for Indigenous people, there's an actual Indigenous person out there who isn't getting that opportunity. So it's a really interesting topic, and one that the Canadaland approach to things has always been to give people the most compelling, entertaining podcasts about things that really matter. And there's this intense interest in scam stories right now. And we thought that that's a perfect opportunity for us to open up awareness of this topic to a much broader audience.
And it's interesting that you talk about Indigenous people for this particular show. I'm talking to you from Turrbal and Jageraland here in Australia. And clearly we have some of these issues as well. This isn't just a Canadian issue, is it?
No, and that's why we feel this is a show that's going to be of interest all around the world. Robert Jago is a Stolo, and he's based out in the Pacific Northwest and in British Columbia, but his co-host, Angel Ellis, is from Oklahoma, and she's on reserve there. And they've certainly seen this phenomenon in the States throughout the academy, throughout universities, and in Hollywood. We've even found pretendians in prison. People go to jail and they pretend to be Indigenous in order to get access to these special programs that are set aside for Indigenous prisoners. So even in prison, you've got a bunch of Hell's Angels, biker gang members who are pretending to be Native.
Julie, Canadaland is full of stories about Canada, but you're not Canadian. And I wonder whether the word Canada helps or hinders any ambitions for Canadaland to be more globally used. What are your thoughts around that?
Well, I know that putting out the call really caught interest from colleagues of mine all over the world. And I think it was simply at a time where there were very few podcast companies anywhere saying, we're interested in pitches, send us ideas. So I think just by virtue of stepping up into that space, a lot of people understood. And we made a point to say, we are looking for stories that will resonate all over the world, whether they originate in Canada, whether they have a sliver of Canadiana in them, or whether they don't. We just are wanting to tell these compelling, entertaining stories, as Jesse said. So I think it maybe creates an expectation that we're quickly, starting to dissolve a bit, and people are should be turning to the network for really high quality, top-notch storytelling and podcasting.
Is the name Canadaland, is there an argument, Jesse, to, it's your company, so is there an argument to say that there might be a different brand for some of the more globally accessible stories that you're covering?
Yeah, there's an argument, and it's a good one. And it's taken me a long time to come around to it. It made my heart sing to hear Julie say that, because for many years I just felt like, come on, people are not that provincial that I won't listen to that podcast because it has Canada in the company's title. I won't listen to that because it has Ireland or Australia. In Canada, we listen to things from the BBC, from NPR. We listen to things from all over the world, and they don't have to be about that part of the world. And for a long time, I had a dream that maybe Canadaland could be a brand that's synonymous not with a country that people find boring, but with great podcasts. And I think that for our listenership, it is that. And we've had some success with shows like Thunder Bay that have received millions of downloads in the States. But ultimately, the argument was made to me, and maybe it's one that you're pointing towards, why fight with one hand tied behind your back? There is a significant portion of potential listeners out there who are going to see Canadaland, and then they're not going to try it out because they just think it's not going to be relevant to them. And I want to sit them down and explain to every one of them that that's a silly prejudice, but
Yes, exactly.
but I'd rather just get people listening to our stuff. So we are a couple of our new shows are going to be released under an imprint called Double Podcasts, and I think for whatever it's worth, you've got an exclusive here, James, because we haven't talked about this yet, but we're going to roll that out and test that against a couple of other new shows we're putting out in which we're staying true to the Canadaland brand.
Well, you heard it here first. I mean, talking about Canada, Jesse, we've seen a lot of talk about how hard it's been over the last few years in podcasting, but that talk, so far as I can work out, has mostly been from the US. Has the Canadian podcast industry been a little bit different in terms of how the last couple of years have fared?
The Canadian podcasting industry is different in that it doesn't really exist. I'll explain what I mean.
That's a bold statement.
If we imagine an industry as like, I don't know, a series of companies that are often in search of profitable, sustainable models, that's not something we've had here. What we've had in Canada has been a proud tradition of public broadcasting. And in the early years of podcasting, the podcast charts were dominated by CBC radio shows that were just offered as podcasts. There was no one pursuing podcasting as a sustainable commercial enterprise except for us. This is not a boast. This is just a fact. The early years, as we saw the model prove out in the States that somebody's podcast could do so well that they could get a sponsor and start reading, promo codes for discounts, and they could start to build businesses. And the low cost of making these shows, and then the incredible audience size that is you can reach when you're in America, which has 10 times the population of Canada, created an economy that created an industry. And it grew into something else that was speculative, and you had other things like branded podcasts that were not necessarily just selling, ad impressions against, audience against ads. That was never possible in Canada because of our population size, unless you were making podcasts in Canada that were reaching, international audiences, which wasn't happening either. So what we did see, and what we've always seen in Canada has been, well, they're doing this in the States, so let's do it too. And so the major media companies that make their money off of things like, offering internet service like Bell Canada or Rogers Canada, and they have media arms, they launched podcasting wings that were not ever expected to turn a profit. They were just sort of like, let's put a toe in this podcasting thing. And then we had successful, one in particular, Pacific Content, a successful branded company, but we did not see the proliferation of independent studios that were actually sustainable. So it put us in a strange position, and that forced, Canadaland, as I said earlier, we had to basically do everything. This question of should you have a serialized show with a limited run season, or should you be always on? Our answer was both. Should you do advertising or should you do direct listener support? Our answer was both. And we were one of the first podcasts ever to turn to our audience for direct financial support through Patreon in, I think, 2014. So I'm being a bit long-winded here, but what happened when the bottom fell out in the United States, it's had a strange effect in Canada because we weren't necessarily relying on those dynamics anyhow. Canadaland never fully moved out of the direct advertising relationships. We never moved to automated ads. We never, we do a little bit of that for our remnant inventory, but we're still reading promo codes, and I'm still endorsing the products myself as our other hosts. And we didn't see a downturn in advertising because our ads convert, and it's not based on the industry CPM rate changing doesn't really affect us that much. And then having monthly recurring revenue through our paid supporter base, that's only grown as well. So the same trends that I had FOMO when I saw all of these other podcast companies getting wild valuations and capital investments and sometimes acquired for ridiculous sums. And I was jealous, but ultimately I don't think that's been good for the industry or for those companies. And we sort of sat the whole thing out, and we're in a relatively safe position. And now we have some of these American players coming to us asking for advice on how they could build out a subscription offer.
Yeah.
You know, we started with a subscription offer and then moved into advertising, and they're kind of doing it the other way around.
Yeah, and certainly paid subscriptions is a very helpful thing when it comes to podcasting, particularly, you know, since drink, because I'm just about to use the word intimate, but particularly since we have such an intimate relationship with the podcasts that we listen to, that paid subscriptions really work from that point of view. And I know that you've been, you know, really pioneering that.
It's kind of you to say. We feel that that's true. And I think you hit that's the right word, is intimacy. I think the intimacy is why paid subscription could work when it works. I think it works a lot better when people support a podcast because they just love it and they believe in what it's doing, more so than that they want some extra bonus thing that's behind the paywall. I think it's that we could call ourselves pioneers, but really we're just doing what NPR and Radiotopia and others have done for a very long time, asking people to pay for something that's free so that everybody can get it for free.
Have you got coins?
We had an offer to do NFTs and to do our own cryptocurrency, and
oh, nice. Yeah, no.
That was not an avenue that we pursued. And then the intimacy is also, I think, we have to be careful in the industry not to lose the intimacy of our advertising, because it can start to sound like kind of just bad commercial radio if it's just all of these pre-recorded ads at different volume settings, interrupting the feeds. I think I love this about podcasting. It's like 1920s television. It's like, we'll find out what Gracie's up to after this message from Lucky Strike,
Yes. No, indeed. Well, our sponsor, Buzzsprout, will be very delighted to hear you say that. Julie, many shows, as Jesse was saying, are going always on rather than seasonal. And I was talking to, I think it was KCRW, a couple of months ago about some of their shows, which have used to be seasonal shows, and they're now doing those shows as always on. How easy is that from a production point of view to actually keep a show which has been a seasonal show and to make that an always on show?
It's not easy. It's one thing I really appreciate about this first round of shows in our slate is that Jesse and Alan and the Canadaland folks were open to trying these ideas out before we commit to creating ongoing forever shows out of them. But I have seen a real slip of standard in these aspirations to make shows always on, and I've been very, very lucky to have been involved with shows that are really steeped in production, craft, storytelling, and haven't had to be pushed to a point where they have to make more efficient productions so they can turn out more episodes per year. If you can do it and you've got the resources and the stamina, all the power to you. I'm not throwing shade on any of the very many always on shows that I listen to, but I think in terms of that transition, it's a very difficult one to do without losing your mind.
So what else is coming up from Canadaland later in the slate?
We have a limited series called A Field Guide to Gay Animals, launching in June, that I'm working very closely with a wonderful team from New Orleans on. And I'm also very proud to be helping a show called The Worst Podcast come to life. And it has been a delight to work on, actually.
I've been on that.
Oh, yes, we all have. We've all worked on them, too. But this is going to take the cake, I promise.
Jesse, just one other question, since I'm always curious about this. Regulation in Canada is always interesting. Last year, the CRTC, the media regulator there, said it would start regulating podcasts, kind of, except it wasn't, except it is. Is it any clearer what they're doing now?
It's about as clear as mud. I think that, like all things, they have good intentions. There is some idea that there is a CanCon system, a Canadian content system, that podcasts might benefit from. But the whole concept of the CanCon system is that you have to pay into it to get money out of it. And as it's been applied in film and television and music, it's always been a bit of a clown show. What is considered Canadian? and these hilarious government metrics that they have for, is this Canadian enough? How do we know if it's Canadian?
Was there a Canadian producer? Was the bass player Canadian? Does it now count? Yeah.
Yeah, there's very funny stories of some of the most Canadian musicians out there creating music that is not considered Canadian because, they were working with, we're international people and we like to work with sometimes you'd have, Bryan Adams doing rock music as a Canadian, sometimes about Canada, but the band wasn't Canadian, so it didn't apply. So everyone is wondering, is that what's going to happen to podcasting? For me, I come from public radio and from more mainstream media backgrounds, and podcasts equal liberty for me and freedom and the notion that anybody can put up a podcast and theoretically have just as much opportunity to be listened to around the world as anybody else. You don't need any special status or license or government. That's an important ethic for me. To kind of shine some kind of light through the haze of this proposed regulatory scheme, it seems to me that who they have their sights on are not individual podcasters or even relatively small companies like Canadaland. I think that they are looking to regulate the platforms, the Apples and Spotify's. Maybe when you get into the scale of podcasting, if we do see some big networks, I don't know if there's some, monetary or download based, if you reach some sort of near monopolistic or there's some level at which they want to start regulating.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to me as if it's they want a certain amount of Canadian shows on the front page of Apple Podcasts, similar for Spotify, similar probably for Radio Player Canada, and for a couple of those other apps, and that's probably it. Would that be about right? Or
that's my best guess. They have not ruled out going directly to publishers, and they've said something about how they have the platforms in mind, but those platforms are also publishers. Spotify is a publisher, and actually Apple is as well. So it's a little bit murky, but I think you're right. I think the irony is that those platforms already prioritize Canadians. The Canadian stuff gets a lot of. We've never had trouble getting promotional attention. My biggest complaint about this so far is that the confusion this creates is bad for the industry. It's I wouldn't want to be in a position of being, trying to raise capital for a new Canadian podcast company right now, because when the regulatory environment is unknown, then that adds risk to any investments.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a bunch of sense. And Facebook, obviously, in Canada, no longer links to news publishers. Can I share a link to Canadaland on Facebook in Canada?
You cannot.
How much does that hurt?
It hurts, but it doesn't hurt tremendously. And we maintained a pretty vibrant Facebook page, and we had tens of thousands of followers, and it was definitely a traffic source for our written articles and our podcasts. But I don't think that Facebook ever was serious about podcasting, and the conversion, like the on-ramp of a Facebook ad or post to people actually listening to a podcast was a sliver of our traffic, but not super meaningful. Where it's a meaningful problem for us is that we are a little engine that could, when it comes to breaking stories as a news company, that have had national relevance. We've broken scandals that have run on the front pages of every major newspaper day after day. And Facebook was definitely part of the picture when it came to those stories reaching wide audiences. And that's gone now. Ironically, what you can still get on Facebook is misinformation, fake news, bad information, garbage information. There's no problem with that. But any news content cannot be on Canadian Facebook. You cannot share news. There's a rule against true information from news organizations.
Julie, one last question to you, and it's a bit cheeky because it's nothing to do with Canadaland. You've just finished your open call for Circuit 3 of Audio Flux. what is AudioFlux?
I'm happy you asked. AudioFlux is a new home for independent audio and new voices and big ideas in podcasting. Basically, we invite people to make short stories, 3 minutes in length, that follow a set of rules. And we have just finished our first open call for the Third Circuit, and we will be debuting those pieces that came from that open call very soon, next month, live. And then we'll put them in a podcast eventually, so it all wraps up into a podcast. So not, still a relevant thing to ask about.
Jesse, Julie, thank you both so much for your time.
Thanks so much, James.
Thank you, James.
The Pod News Weekly Review with Buzzsprout. Podcast hosting made easy.
Let's whiz around the world a little bit. Edison Research has published its top 50 podcasts in the US. Any change, James? It's just, isn't it the same old, same old?
Yeah, it's mostly the same old, same old. There is a new entry at number 4, New Heights, with Jason and Travis Kelce. They were in the top 50 last time round, but they weren't in the top 10. So it's kind of a new entry at number 4, which is the top 10 is all we care about. Well, yes, exactly. And what happens when Taylor Swift inevitably breaks up with whichever of the Kelce brothers?
It's a new album.
She's going out. Happens. Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, have you heard her new one, which came out only a couple of weeks ago?
No.
Well, that's a dirge.
No, haven't heard her old ones. Haven't heard her new ones.
That's a proper dirge. That is. It's all really miserable songs. Anyway,
I thought she was happy.
I thought she was happy too, but clearly her new album is not. Anyway, yes, so that came out. I noted that 22 of the top 50 are hosted by Megaphone, and you'll find a full list, including links to each, on the Pod News website. So that is a thing. Also, the Trident Digital Podcast Ranker is out for Australia. One of the clever things that the ABC has done down here is that they've added ABC News Top Stories to the ranker. Now, that is the podcast that you get if you ask a smart speaker to play the latest news, and it plays this slightly soporific news show, which is about 3.5 minutes long. Weirdly enough, as soon as you add that to a ranker, as Fox has found out in the US, as Sky News Australia has found out here, then you get very high in the ranker, because quite a lot of people are doing that. So there they are, brand new at number 3 in the Australian podcast ranker. Everybody's a winner in that, by the way. ARN's number 1 publisher. Listener is number 1 sales representative. The ABC is number 1 for total downloads. So everybody gets to send me a press release saying that they're number 1, and I ignore every single one of them. As
I like to say, the hot chocolate awards, everyone's a winner, baby.
Everybody's a winner. Yes, exactly. And Podscribe have announced some international things as well, which is good that Podscribe have realised that there is life beyond the US. They've now got insights into the top 600 shows in Germany, Mexico, France, the UK, Australia, and Canada as well.
I haven't looked at the data, but I was wondering, are we getting homogenous podcasts like we have homogenous music? I mean, you can go onto Spotify. They do have an actually interesting side to Spotify where you can go and type out top 10 in the UK, Australia, Germany, France, wherever. And guess what? It's normally the same people who are top in every country. We don't have much cultural difference anymore in music. Are we getting to the same point with podcasting?
Well, now Will Page, who's a friend of the show, will deeply disagree with you there, saying that local has never been more important in terms of music. And obviously, we have both just suffered the Eurovision Song Contest, and clearly there's a fair amount of stuff going on there as well. In terms of podcast shows, no. I mean, it's very much, language is very important, of course, for podcasts, and so there is that. But also, I mean, even just looking into the UK numbers versus the US numbers, there's very little overlap. I think I saw, something like 2 or 3 shows in the top 30 that are top in both the UK and the US. So no, I think it's a very nicely local thing, really. So I can well understand why the Podscribe team are now looking into the top 600 shows in each of those places.
Your old employers are getting a little bit feisty. The BBC are looking still to put ads into podcasts, and let's be honest, a lot of people are very, very angry about it. What are they saying, James?
Yeah, so just to put this in context, the BBC doesn't have any ads on anything that it does in the UK at all. It does, of course, for the rest of the world, but it doesn't in the UK. And what they've said that they would like to do is to put ads on their podcasts if you're listening to them on the Apple Podcasts app or in Spotify or in other places. And presumably they will be sold by Acast, I'm guessing, because they sell them everywhere else. Anyway, the rest of the industry is up in arms. Weirdly, not Acast, but the rest of the industry is up in arms about the BBC doing this. They reckon it's the thin end of the wedge. They reckon that it could be disastrous for the industry. And 20 companies have sent an open letter, which got a good amount of PR earlier on in the week. Really interesting to watch what happens there. I really don't think that it's a thing that the BBC ought to be doing within the UK, because that's what the government mandated license fee is there for, and I think that's where it should get its money. You could argue that they resell some of their programs for other TV channels in the UK, and those have ads around them and everything else, but that's not quite the same as what's going on here. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out and whether or not they do actually go ahead and do that.
You know, you're on the wrong side of it when Gary Lineker says it's disastrous.
This is Gary Lineker, the BBC's biggest employment cost. He earns about 1.6 million, I think, every year from the BBC.
Yeah,
or
he took a pay cut from 2 million.
Yeah, some ridiculous figure. But his goal hanger has basically said, no, don't whatever you do this. And so, of course, that's the thing that the UK papers have picked up on.
Nice story in Sweden. Storytel, a Swedish audiobook and publishing company, is to add 6,000 Swedish language podcasts to its service.
Yes, which will be a nice thing. Very clever for them to add podcasts onto an audiobook service. In Australia, Southern Cross Stereo was going to be taken over by ARN. They're basically the two big radio and podcast companies here. But somebody pulled out of that deal. A partner for ARN pulled out of that deal. The partner was called Anchorage Capital. And they pulled out because they've suddenly realised, maybe it's not quite as easy to earn money out of TV, weirdly, as we thought that it was, because the deal includes some TV channels as well. Anyway, so it looks basically now as if that whole takeover is off. It's been rumbled for the last 3 months here. I know that it's been very taxing for all of the people involved in those radio companies, because they've had to do all kinds of due diligence and everything else. And then all of a sudden it sounds as if everything has fallen through. So that's fun. We'll wait and see what happens there.
Yeah, the lawyers are happy. They'll keep it going for another 3 months. You'll be fine.
Oh, I'm sure they will. I mean, the interesting thing was around the podcast apps and what was going to happen there. SCA owns their own podcast app and their own code base called Listener, whereas ARN uses iHeart. And everybody, all of the silly financial people have been saying, well, obviously they would go with Listener, the code base that is owned by one of those companies. And I'm not sure that that's so obvious anymore, because actually thinking about it, iHeart is everywhere. iHeart is on all kinds of surfaces, from hotel TVs to, cars to all kinds of other places. iHeart is obviously in the US, where iHeart Media is, but it's also in places like Canada and Brazil and Mexico and and New Zealand and other places as well. So actually, iHeart is probably a better bet, because they've already done an awful lot of integrations with third-party companies. Seems like it's quite a sensible thing rather than build your own. But I'm sure that the that the dim stock market people will think otherwise. But anyway, it all doesn't matter anymore because it's all fallen through.
Just a last story that I saw. Tucker Carlson's podcast is now going to be recalled Tucker Carlson's Show. And also Jon Stewart is going to launch a weekly show, which is actually a podcast. So
yes.
Either they've taken your advice and decided to not use podcast in the name of the title of their shows, or they just don't want it to be known as a podcast. Which is it?
Yeah, I think it's probably that the Tucker Carlson podcast is filmed, and they all of a sudden realised that it would be a bit weird if they got, I don't know, carriage on a TV network with the Tucker Carlson podcast. That would look a bit strange. So they've just renamed it as Tucker Carlson Show. The artwork still says Tucker Carlson Podcast, by the way. Maybe it's a step in the multi-platform world that we're in to not call anything a podcast. But as you so rightly say, in my mind, you shouldn't be calling things podcasts anyway.
People News on the Pod News Weekly Review.
Yes, so let's take a look at some people news. Julie McNamara is, reported to be leaving Spotify. She's left Spotify, although Spotify declines to comment. She is head of studios. She joined in September 2021 in the middle of all of the Dawn Ostroff stuff. Another one bites the dust in terms of Spotify. And Katie Law has joined Bumper as a podcast growth specialist. If you've seen Katie's name before, she writes Pod the North, a newsletter on Canadian podcasting, and in just a couple of weeks' time, the Power Up Podcast Summit in Toronto, which I will be at, also has Katie speaking on one of the panels there as well, which should be worthwhile going to. Tickets are still available for that. They're about $99 Canadian, so that's about $2.50. No, I'm joking. That should be good. And in events, the Webby Awards took place this week. As you'll know, Sam, if you win an award, you have to give a 5-word speech.
Wouldn't know that James never won an award.
No. Oh yes. It's just me that's won 2 of them the same year. So Julia Louis-Dreyfus ended up giving a 5-word speech. The first 4 words of which were "listen to old women." I won't give you the last one. So that's nice. And the Independent Podcast Awards are coming up. You've 3 weeks to enter them. They close at the end of the month, and the awards are in London in October.
And I've got my speech ready now for the Webby Awards in the future.
Oh, yes, go on.
Thank you to James Cridland.
Excellent. Very nice. Very nice.
Podcast events on the Pod News Weekly Review.
The podcast show, of course, is next week. I have some brand new data in my opening keynote, which I've nearly finished. I'm slightly late for that. That is good. The UK is leading the world in one podcast metric, Sam. Bet you can't guess what that podcast metric is.
I've had various thoughts, but no, I won't share.
Now you're speaking as well, aren't you?
Yes, I'm doing a slightly controversial one. I'm speaking on why paying listeners is the future of podcast advertising.
Excellent.
So yes, no one's going to be turning up to that one because it's 4:00. But hey.
So you're on 4:00 on the 22nd of May, and I'm doing various things. One thing I'm looking forward to doing, which is hosting a panel about monetization with a bunch of American podcasters. And they all want a conference call about that. And the only time, of course, is at midnight my time, so that's going to be good. And I may or may not have been to the bar earlier, so we'll see how that meeting goes. But anyway, very much looking forward to all of that, and also looking forward to doing this very show live on stage, which is one of the last sessions of the 2 days. So if you are there and you want to come to that, then that will be a good thing, just to take part in a Pod News Weekly Review live from the event. I say live, it won't be live from the event, but we're recording it live because that's how these things work. So all of that should be good.
You're also doing an Aussie presentation, aren't you?
Yes, there's an Australian panel which I'm doing, looking at the Australian podcast market, which 3 people and a dog will come to, 3 people and a dingo will come to. So that'll be fun. I'm also doing my great tools from podcasting that you should be all using. And these are lots of different tools, some of them powered by AI, some of them not, on the creator stage, which involves lots of live demos, and everything is probably going to go wrong. So if you want to watch a man doing some live demos and everything going wrong, then come and watch me doing that too. So yes, I'm doing a bunch of these things.
Some of the other events going on, Crosswires will be in Sheffield on May the 31st. That's Dino Sofos from Persephonica and James O'Hara. I'll be going up there for that, so that'll be an interesting trip up north. There's also, James, you're in Toronto, aren't you? You talked about that earlier.
I am. I'm in Toronto, June the 2nd, the Podcast Power Up Summit, which should be good. Unipodfest has been announced at Birmingham City University. Are you going to that? In Birmingham, are you going to that?
Yeah, I will. No, I won't after that impersonation. I'll be shot on the way. No, I'll be going up there. My daughter's at Birmingham University, not City University, and so I'll go and meet up with my daughter, and then we'll both go over and watch George the Poet. Yes.
Excellent. And the Podcast Standards Project and the Podcast Academy are planning a series of webinars. Are you doing these?
I am indeed, yes, with Michelle Cobb, and we'll be putting out a press release very shortly. But the dates for those are the 21st of June, the 16th of July, and the 7th of September.
Excellent, very nice. And there are more events, both paid for and free at Pod News. Virtual events or events in a place with people. If you're organising something, it's free. podnews.net/events.
The tech stuff on the Pod News Weekly Review.
Yes, it's the stuff you'll find every Monday in the Pod News newsletter. Here's where Sam talks technology. What have we got this week, Sam?
It's the sigh at the end of that, though.
Here's where Sam talks technology.
What
have you got this week, Sam?
Yeah,
here we go. Buckle up. Buckle up.
Yeah.
Here we are. Lightning wallets. Lightning wallets, publisher feeds, mobile apps. Here we go.
Now, Wavlake, the podcasting music website that it started a couple of years ago by Sam Means and Michael Ray. We talked about them last week, about some of the new stuff they've got going on, Lightning wallets, publisher feeds, their new mobile app, and much, much more. So I pinged Sam and said, look, do you fancy coming on the show to tell us more about it? So I started off by asking Sam, quickly remind us who is Wavlake, and then tell us what's new.
Wavelake's a lot of things. Most importantly, we're trying to come up with a new on-ramp for artists to distribute music in a different way. Distribute music over RSS, distribute music over Nostr, be able to use all of these, some new interesting technologies to take control of their life as an artist and as a creative person. Typically, that's been very difficult to do, at least in any type of way that's going to make you money. So we're trying to help in that capacity for independent artists that are just getting started or have been around for a long time, and they're just looking for new ideas and want to, try some stuff out.
So as a new independent artist, I come to Wavlake, I sign up, you create my RSS feed for me because you just asked me to fill in some forms, but that in the background is creating my RSS. I get listed, and then things have changed since we last spoke. You've now added a Lightning wallet capability, so independent artists can now have a wallet and get paid directly from fans. So when did that happen, and how's the uptake been?
Yeah, the Lightning Wallet integration happened not too long ago. So yeah, I mean, when we started this out, you know this more than most, we've been able to do this kind of stuff for a while. When I started getting into this, there wasn't a super easy way to do it. So that was the initial idea, is like, let's just get this to a point where a simple user, someone who hasn't really heard about this, can just try it. I don't need to be super educated about it. I don't have to get super techie. I can just sign up. I have a Lightning wallet. My music is up there, and that process is very similar to what they may experience on Bandcamp or something like that. I think we're pushing 700 artists have uploaded directly through Wavlake, and some of them have their own Lightning wallets, and they want that money to just go straight to there. We never wanted to really hold on to anybody's money. It just is sort of a necessity to be kind of a custodian to some extent for people, for early educational purposes. Like people just have no idea how to do that. So yeah, we added that, I guess, probably about a month ago now. And it's cool. People are using it. I'm using it. It's great. It's going to be really great for people. We wanted to do it because we just want people to know what a lightning address is, because it's so useful in so many other places, especially on Nostr.
Yeah, you keep talking about Nostr. So one of the features you've added is support for the Olby wallet. That's the primary wallet that you're supporting. But you added a feature from Olby called Nostr Wallet Connect, or I prefer to call it New Wallet Connect, because although it's using Nostr, and that really sort of turns some people off, and other people it turns them on, depending on which side of the fence you are with Nostr. But I prefer to call it New Wallet Connect, because fundamentally, if you want to use your Strike wallet or your Coinbase wallet or another wallet, you can just bring that wallet to Wavlake rather than just have to have an Olby wallet. So I think the first thing you've done is implemented the NWC, let's use that word. Are you seeing people using other wallets now as well as the Olby wallet?
We are, yeah. I mean, there are other options. I'm really excited about that because, yeah, it's a very manual process. If you're using a Nostr client, our mobile app is a Nostr client. We'll talk about that in a second. But if you're using a Nostr client, it doesn't have a wallet built in. So you can attach a lightning address to it. People can pay you. But if you want to pay somebody in return, you typically have to click a button, and then it's going to open that other app on your phone or on your desktop. And you're going to have to do a bunch of different things. And NWC is really cool because, yeah, you can just use it. You connect it through a little string. It's a little techie. I'm sure it'll get much easier as time goes on. But once you do it, it's really cool because then it's just really seamless. So if you're using a client that uses NWC, then you can just zap content immediately without ever having to leave your screen. It just happens in real time right there, which is cool. So it's sort of acts as a custodial wallet inside of these other clients, which is NWC is really cool because you can use it in many different places. So you can have one wallet that you're using sort of universally everywhere. And then on the other side of that, Wavlake.com is also an NWC wallet. So if you wanted to use your balance on Wavlake for some other site, you could do that as well. So it works both ways.
Oh, very neat. Oh, I didn't realize that. That's really cool. Now, you talked about the mobile app. Again, since we last spoke, you didn't have a mobile app.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about the mobile app, and is it both iOS and Android?
Yeah, it is. It's still very much in beta. It's on test flight. If you go to app.wavlake.com, you can download it if you know how to use test flight, or you know how to use I'm not an Android user, so I don't know the proper terminology there, but it's the Google testing thing.
The side load.
Yeah, so you can do all that. It's beautiful. We built it. We released it in November. We've been working on it quite a bit since then, in between other stuff. But we really just built the mobile app as a showcase just to show what we think needs to be out there, and also to just develop features that we would like to see happen, and just use that as a showcase for other clients to use it. So it's like, hey, maybe Fountain doesn't have this, and we think it's really cool. Let's build it and show how it works and how it interacts. And then maybe Fountain will see that and they'll build that into their app, that type of thing. So we never really much intended on doing a mobile app, at least not as quickly as we did, but everything just started growing and it just became a necessity to do it. And especially once Nostr came along, I feel like I'm Nostr poster boy right now talking about it every 5 seconds. But it's exciting because whatever side of the fence you're on, it's fun for development. And that's what we're using it for. It's like a playground to try out some of these new ideas and see what we can do with them. And these are ideas that we didn't think we would be able to get to for a long time. So it's cool to be able to do them now in a very easy way.
I think Fountain is safe to say they are a Nostr fan like yourselves. They created a radio app recently, and that used Nostr as well as a payment mechanism. So I can see Oscar embracing what you guys are doing. I can see that as a very good synergy. Now, with the app and with the hosting, are you becoming a vertical platform? Is that the idea?
I mean, we're just trying to put stuff out there. Really, we're just putting whatever out there that we can. I mean, we're not necessarily trying to do anything other than have fun with this and see if we can change some things. The greater idea, I mean, I think a lot of people might think we're trying to get all these things into one box, but it's all open. It's all completely open. So if you use Wavlake as a host, it goes out everywhere else, just like any other host does. And I don't know, maybe there's some stuff with the feeds that the purists might not agree with, but most of this stuff comes down to just ease of use and things we're trying to do to handhold a new artist getting into this. Because a couple of years ago, I was uploading my music on RSS feeds and it wasn't easy and things were breaking and it was kind of complicated and there wasn't much client support at all. It was very clunky. So I'm just happy to be participating in this at all. And I'm happy to be, it does certainly seem in the last year and a half like there's been a lot of push towards music in the podcasting space, which I absolutely love, because that's all I want to see happen. Because I just think it is a powerful medium for music. And I think it has the potential to really change a lot of things. So yeah, I think if we're all just kind of working on stuff on our own and then come together when things start working for one person or the other, then I think ultimately the community there will establish a really strong just overall experience for artists, whether they're using Wavlake or they're using True Fans or they're using LN Beats, they're using any of these other things out there. That's the cool thing about it, is they have options and we're all sort of working towards the same goal. Maybe not exactly towards the same goal. Maybe we're not all working on the exact same thing, but we're definitely working on the same goal.
I think we're all on the same page. I think what I said to James when we did our prediction show back in January was that we'll all be doing it at different paces, and some will implement certain features first and some will implement other features. But by the end of the year, we'll probably all be on a very similar trajectory.
Yeah, and that's the cool thing about having so many people working on different ideas is we're all pretty limited in capacity. I know we are. There's 3 of us. I don't code anything. So it's like I'm just annoying people all the time. So it's good to have people working on other ideas. I think that's a beautiful thing. That's like the most beautiful thing about this.
I think with my CEO of True Fans hat on, I can say we've taken the Wavlake RSS feed and we ingest that and it all works very well now. And all the monetization,
Cool.
the V4V, all working nicely. Now, one of the things that you and I had a conversation about with Michael probably 3 months ago, maybe a little longer ago, we talked about music didn't have categories. If you look at the Apple category list, it's only music or music chat show or I think there's a couple of other minor subcategories. But if I want to label an artist soul or rock or punk or whatever it would be, there was no category list. And I know Julie Costello, Ainsley Costello's mum, gave me, True Fans, a list of, I think, about 30 categories, music categories. And that was great. It was a good start. And I shared that with RSS Blue and a few others. And then you came up with what I think is pretty much an extensible list. It's very good. And we've adopted your Wavlake music genre list. So when did you come up with that and why did you come up with it as well?
I mean, yeah, I'm a musician and putting a title on a musician is tough. So I've always been slightly outside of the genre camp. But as somebody who's now working on a mobile app and hosting a podcast where I need to find music and putting together playlists and things, it's helpful. It's definitely helpful to have these categories. The musician in me says, like, I'm not really putting these people in a box, but you kind of have to put them somewhere. Because if you want to find country music, you got to find the closest thing to it. And I guess the cool thing about this is, in this situation, people are actually determining what they want to call themselves. So they got to pick something. The list came from, I can't remember, Michael found the list somewhere. I think it was just an open list of categories and subcategories somewhere. And we adopted that and we put it on GitHub and we encourage people to just go and add whatever they like to it and we'll accept it. It just was like a starting point. But yeah, it is incredibly helpful, especially in the future. I think it will be for this idea of radio broadcasting. You may see more apps like the Fountain Jukebox or more traditional broadcasting style apps using RSS or pulling in music over the relays. It's a necessary, I don't want to call it evil. That seems a little too overdramatic. But like I said, that was the problem. A lot of clients weren't really supporting music. And so even if you did upload your music and you could see it on Fountain or you could see it on Sphinx or one of these other clients that, kind of in the early stages of this were pulling in 2.0 stuff and enabling the monetization of it, they were still kind of clunky for music. So now we're having to go back, I think, a little bit and reverse engineer some of these clients that exist to fit music as well as podcasts. And I know Fountain's going to be doing audiobooks and some other things. And that's cool, is, realizing like this is all just media at the end of the day. It supports video, live streaming. I've watched some really cool live streams in some of these apps too now. So, that's the cool thing about it. Yeah, we just have to kind of start somewhere. And if another list pops up that seems like it's better, we'll use that one.
As you said, it's a great place to start. And I think it's a really comprehensive list. And I hope all the other apps and hosts who support music take it on board. I mean, we have at True Fans. So when we see medium equals music, we then switch to your list and then we look in the RSS feed for the category and then we can then label it whatever the artist has chosen.
Yeah, it would certainly make it easier to unify some of this stuff for sure.
Okay, so let's move on. One of the other interesting things that has been ratified within the Podcasting 2.0 space recently are called publisher feeds, or artist feeds now as well. So that started off again with RSS Blue and Fountain coming up with an idea of how to aggregate, I suppose, in a discography, an artist's music, albums, because what was happening was some people were starting on Wavlake, then they had a bit on RSS Blue, then they had a bit somewhere else, and it was all over the place. And people were like, oh, how do we aggregate this all under one artist view rather than a podcast up view? So most people were going to, let's say, one page with an artist and then going, well, how do I find out what else that artist does? And there wasn't a natural mechanism. So this publisher feed came out. It's now part of phase 7. And I think it's just about to be greenlit by Adam and Dave. So the publisher feed is now something that I believe, when I spoke to Michael anyway, that Wavlake is also going to be pushing out shortly, or has pushed out. I don't know where you are with it.
Yeah, I think we have pushed it out. It makes a ton of sense to me. That was one of those things where we've been hearing about that for a while through Oscar, and it's just like finding the time to do it. It just is always was one of those things where this makes so much sense. We just need the right moment where we can catch a breath and get something else pushed in here and make sure that it's going to happen. Plus, with these things, they do take time because you're wanting to get everybody on board and make sure it's going to be something that's actually going to go through. Because as you know, on some of these things, there can be a lot of back and forth with it. I'm excited to see that go through. That's going to make things incredibly easy. And I think that there's some cool use cases for that down the road as well. Just being able to put all that stuff in one place. I mean, things like that for record labels. And yeah, there's all kinds of good things that can be sprouted off of that.
No, I think when people get their heads around it, then people are going to really begin to extend it quite a lot. Moving on to one of the other things that you're working on, which I think is really interesting as well, is something called TicketBot, which is a ticketing system. Tell me more.
Yeah, so that's just a proof of concept. We have a show that we're doing in Nashville at the Bitcoin conference on July 25th, the industry day of the Bitcoin conference. It's the first day leading up to the 2 main days. But yeah, I mean, as soon as we found out the show was going to be in Nashville, right after the last conference, we're like, we got to do a show. So we started thinking about it. And more recently, in the last couple of months, we were like, wouldn't it be fun if we could do the RSVPs in the app? That'd be really cool. Because that's another one of those things where, and it's another really great use case of Nostr. It's like, we could do this over Nostr. This is something that we've been talking about doing for a long time. But a year ago, we did the mobile app. We did a little hackathon thing. It was about a week or two, and it was called Waveman. And it was just sort of our proof of concept for what ultimately ended up becoming the mobile app. So in honor of that and starting a new tradition for Wavlake, TicketBot became our sort of hackathon proof of concept thing to work on for April of this year. And it would just perfectly coincide with the fact that we have a concert in July. Michael would be much better at describing the technical side of that. And our show Waveform, we talked about it a little bit more in depth in the last episode that we did. But yeah, I mean, it's very simple right now. It's basically just if you go in the Wavlake app, we have ticket capability. If you buy the ticket, you sign it with your NPUB without getting too nerdy. You sign it with your Nostr profile, and it's a pay what you want situation for this. We just set it at a minimum of 1 sat. And when you buy the ticket, it gives you a QR code, and then the Nostr bot spits the information back out in your DMs. It's very simple. There's not much to it. Down the road, I mean, we put it out there. It's also open source. We're hoping some people like this idea and they want to jump in and start messing around with it and inspiring us to do some more stuff with it. But yeah, I think ultimately it's going to be great for just having events. I mean, it uses the Nostr like calendar, NIP, whatever that is. So, we put the event out there and we already saw some clients that are just already reading calendar events are displaying this. And so you're starting to see how, much like RSS, these things can exist in other places without any permission. They're just like there. I don't know. I think there's a lot of really cool potential to it. In the meantime, we're just going to be testing it out. Like if somebody like Joe Martin goes on tour and wants to try it out, we can try it out for him. But we're hoping it's something that works. Maybe it'll be used for live streams. There's many other use cases for ticketing. Maybe it'll just be used for meetups or whatever. It really could be anything. It just might be another use case. Or maybe somebody will just take this and build a standalone app for ticketing. I think that would be a really powerful thing.
Yeah, there's a really cool company in London called Podlife Events that are working on a ticketing system for podcasting, which I think is worth looking at. And I think also I've been working with them on a publisher feed for events. So using the same remote item structure that you have in publisher feeds. So in an artist feed, which would have all of their music and their tracks and the links to their existing other podcast feeds. You can actually do an event feed. Let's call it that for want of a better word. And with that event feed, you can have start time, end time, location. All of that can be within a feed, and then you can have a remote item point to it. So you can have an artist with multiple tour dates and tickets, and then you can say, here's your event feed that's as part of your RSS, which can be read by apps, and then they can present that on the same page. So in Wavlake, you could have the artist, their discography, then you can have their event page and with all the dates, and then you can have a ticket button, click the button, buy the button, etc., etc. And then, that leads into eventually, I guess, two things that I want to ask you at the end. Are you going to be looking at video as another format that you'll support?
Yeah, I mean, live streaming and merch are the two sort of obvious things. They'll either end up being a hackathon type thing too, or just something that we do when we get time. But ultimately, I mean, I've been in the music business most of my life, and I just, the things that are important, and merch, to me, merch and live streaming, I think are important just to highlight. I don't know how far down that rabbit hole we'll get for a while, but I do think it'd be cool to try, just to have a little fun with that kind of stuff. Like if somebody wanted to just, with the live streaming thing, I just envisioned someone working on a song and getting instant feedback within Wavlake. That just seems like a really cool thing I'd like to see happen. So yeah, I think, we're at the point now where we just want to start building out more studio features in the back end for the band. That's probably where we'll be putting most of the focus at, and getting the mobile app to an actual public release. And we have a couple other things to wrap up before we push that out. But yeah, I mean, hopefully by the end of the year, we'll have a new feature or two, and this mobile app will be out publicly to the world, and we'll really start making our push at that point.
Yeah. And when you talk about studio, do you mean the back end, the stuff that the artist can do?
Yeah, that's internal lingo. Yeah. So we call it basically like the upload section, the back section that an artist would be using. We call that studio right now.
Okay.
So right now that's pretty simple. It's just really, you can upload your music and you can see your stats. You can upload a podcast if you want to there. But soon enough, being able to go live from there, to be able to add your tickets and your events from there, to be able to sell merchandise from there, or connect it to your merch store or something. There's a lot of cool stuff we can do with that.
Cool. So that's a lot that you've been working on. I mean, just as a refresh, the Nostr Wallet Connect, the music genre, the mobile app, publisher feeds, the ticket bot, event that you're coming up with, and second half of the year hasn't even started.
Busy dudes.
Busy dudes. Two last questions. Are you funded? I mean, is this self-funded? How are you sustaining this?
Yeah, we did a small funding round about 1.5 years ago, and that's been getting us through. We're keeping a low profile, just trying to make it stick. I mean, we're going to just keep doing this no matter what, but it was definitely helpful to get a little help from some early stage people who really believed in what we were doing. So it's always unexpected when you just have an idea and people are like, that's a good idea. Here's some money.
And fast forward 6 months, what do you think the industry will look like for you in the music world?
I mean, I really don't know. It's like the world is such a weird place right now. The music industry is really, I mean, it's been so weird, but it's like really boiling over at this point. People are starting to just call things out. Just every day people are starting to call things out. It used to just be the artists and people would be like, whatever. And it was just, no one really wanted to fight for it. But I mean, I think the main reason is just there wasn't a solution. The solution is here now. It's just good timing. I really don't know how it's going to play out. I suspect it might take a little bit longer than we hope it will, because, it is here. So you do want to be like, come over here. This is great. The answer is here, but we still have all of this stuff podcasting isn't new, but this idea is new. Like I was less than 3 years ago screaming on Twitter for someone to do something with music and podcasting, and there just wasn't much there. Dave and Adam were like, yeah, that's a good idea. Somebody should do this, but people weren't doing it. It was difficult to get anybody to do anything. I was literally begging people. It is moving fast. Technology moves fast. I'm very stoked that there are a lot of podcasters out there now very interested in music. So, I am hopeful that it is going to happen quick. 6 months, I don't know. I mean, I think we're all just working really hard, and I think we're going to see some really cool new features in the next 6 months. As far as adoption goes, I think we still have a long way to go because this stuff is all so new.
Yeah, it is very new. Sam, thank you so much, my friend. Great catching up on what Wavelake's doing. Just quick one. If someone wants to go and get tickets for the event, what's the date of the event? Who's performing? And how do I get tickets?
Yes, thank you for asking that. I should have shilled that concert a little bit harder. This event is in Nashville. If you're going to be at the Bitcoin conference or you're in the radius of Nashville on July 25th, you should go. It's at a place called the Vinyl Lounge, which is attached to a really cool vinyl production plant called the Vinyl Lab. Some familiar names. Joe Martin's playing. Ainsley Costello's playing. Just Loud is playing. The High or Low is playing. There's going to be this really fun sort of live kind of karaoke thing where if you know how to play guitar to Smells Like Teen Spirit, you say you want to do that song and 3 other people see it on the list and they know how to play drums and they know how to play bass, then you just get up and play it. It's kind of a fun thing. So that'll be cool. Right now, if you go to wavlake.com and scroll down a little bit, you'll see a couple little app icons and you can test out the mobile app. And in there, you can RSVP for this event. If you RSVP in the Wavlake app, I will be making a nice little gift and giving it to you at the door because I also have a little merch thing that I do. So you'll get a free little fun gift with the ticket. And most importantly, like I said, it's a 1 sat minimum to RSVP. And if you want to pay 10,000 sats for the ticket, we're going to give all that to the bands. So whatever comes in through the Wavlake RSVP will just go straight to them.
Will it be broadcast live? Sorry, I missed that.
Oh, yeah. So we're doing it with Tunester. I don't know if you're familiar with Tunester at all.
Yep.
But Open Mic will be setting up a live stream and that's going to be broadcasted live as well. So be on the lookout July 25th, 7 p.m. Central Time.
Excellent. Thanks, Sam. Have a great one. Speak to you soon.
Thank you, Sam.
The Pod News Weekly Review with Buzzsprout. Podcast hosting made easy.
So there we go, Sam Means. Now, James, one of the interesting things I thought about the interview with Sam himself was they are heavily moving towards the Noster camp. The new mobile app is going to be a Noster relay app. So that's one part. The ticketing bot that they've been playing with, the way you get a ticket is you zap across the price of the ticket. So, and again, they are using something called the Noster Wallet Connect. Now, that doesn't mean it's only for Noster, but it uses the Noster relay system as well. I feel like Wavlake are very heavily embracing Noster as their directional path. I know Fountain is a big advocate of Noster. You know, they did a very cool radio app. They use Zaps and Olby themselves even, which produces the Noster Wallet Connect, is a big advocate of Noster. So that's one thing. I'm quite surprised that they're going down that road. I'll be clear with my True Fan CEO hat on here. I can 100% say we will be spending 0 developer cycles on Noster. I don't like or want to go down that road. We built True Fans as an activity stream platform. It's at its core, that's what it does. You know, we talked about cross-app comments earlier, and we talked about, you know, activity going back to hosts. We built that at its core. We aren't going to be supporting Noster. We are going to be a full ActivityPub client. And I think this is the first time, James, I think we're seeing a fissure. Is that the right word? A fissure. That's it.
Fissure.
Yes, a break, a split in the direction of...
Split's easy,
yes.
isn't it? Yes, no, I agree. And I think, Noster, the one thing that Noster has going for it is everyone who is on Noster thinks that it's brilliant. And there seems to be less of that from, that I see from, the podcasting 2.0 sort of world and ActivityPub and everything else. Everybody who is in Noster thinks it's the best thing ever. And and I wonder whether there's something that we can learn from that. But whenever I've gone into Noster, it's just like lots of tech bros who are super excited about everything, but actually think very critically about nothing. And it's not for me either.
And dare I say it, it's a younger generation who are embracing Noster.
And it's also so insecure. It's such a bad piece of technology anyway, is Noster, that actually, I can't. Guess how you change your password in Noster? Oh, you don't, because you can't. So if somebody gets the the Noster key that you use, your private key, which you have to type into. You have to type into apps to allow you to post and to allow you to take part in Noster. If somebody gets that key, then guess what? You have to start all over again. You can't just change that key. You have to stop and start all over again. It's a fatally flawed thing, and I really don't understand why the Noster Bros are so excited by it. If you believe different, then send us a boost using Lightning. Send us a boost, and that will be a lovely thing to find out. But to me, none of it makes any sense.
Outside of that, I think Wavlake is doing some really interesting things. So I do like the fact that they've got publisher feeds. I do like the fact that they are, looking at this new music genre category. So again, hats off to Wavlake for pushing the boat out. As a fellow developer, I just say I'm going down a different path. We'll see which one's the right path eventually.
Indeed. Right, well, let's dive on with other things. Mumbler says that they are going to be supporting transcripts. They're a podcast hosting and monetization platform. Interestingly, they're making transcripts available in 85 languages. And yes, it is Podcasting 2.0 compatible. Also, in terms of transcripts, the new owner of Castro says that transcripts are coming to the Castro podcast app, which is a good and big one for the iOS community. And the company's Android app, which is called Aurelian, is now using Castro for trending and search. And so my suspicion is that app will slowly but surely turn into Castro for Android as well, which is very nice. Also, support for transcripts are coming to AntennaPod, which has done a load of code restructuring work. If you want to learn how complicated it is to make a mobile app, then take a read of the post that AntennaPod has just put up about all of the work that they've had to end up doing. More than 200 people have worked on the app since its launch 13 years ago, which is pretty impressive, I think.
Yeah, very. Now, Headliner has added free captioning for full-length episodes. And I just wanted to ask you, James, because I don't really know. I say the words, but I don't really know. What's the difference between a transcript and a caption? Can't transcripts be used for captions, or do you have to have a different format?
Captions are the things that appear if you are making if you're watching TV, for example, those are captions that you see on the screen. If you are reading just a page, a web page, that is a transcript. And so a caption is a transcript with timing. That's basically how it works. So if you've got a caption file like a VTT file or an SRT file, then you can use that to make transcripts, but not the other way around. You can't just take a random text file and hope to get some timing information out of that. It doesn't work that way.
James talks technology. There you go. Now I understand.
There you go.
Now, Speak Up AI, a tool that takes textual articles and produces podcasts with your cloned voice, has raised $500,000. That sounds good. But yesterday, your favourite company, James, 11 Labs, launched their iOS app. And that does exactly the same.
Yes, a bunch of these people doing exactly the same thing. So, completely agree. So it's weird seeing companies earning all of this money, raising all of this money for something that, frankly, isn't that different anymore. 11 Labs will do the same thing. Wondercraft will do the same thing. That man who you quite fancy. All of that. So
my bro.
Yes.
My bro.
Oscar. Yeah.
Oscar.
So, it's just a bit weird. But, if you're a company called Speak Up AI, then I assume as soon as you've added the word AI, then you can earn some more money out of it in just the same way that Google I/O earlier on this week was just full of AI stuff from Google that nobody cared about, really.
Google's going to do the Googling for you now.
Yes. Well, and what
that was the strap line.
What I love now is that Google now has a special new option in Google search, which is called web search, where you can actually search the web without any of the other stuff that Google puts around your searches, which is just brilliant. The fact that they've even launched that, it's actually a product. The fact that they've actually launched that shows how much Google have lost the plot.
Are you sure? Because since yesterday, it's probably been killed.
Oh, well, yeah, quite possibly. Evo Terra wrote an interesting thing, hasn't he, recently?
He did. He wrote a guide for looking at what the best fiction podcast app. And I actually had a Mastodon conversation with Evo about what makes a good fiction podcast app. What should we do? And he rightly pointed out to me that if you don't support the serial tag as opposed to episodic correctly, then the order of the podcast is going to be wrong. And also he had a whole bunch of other little metrics that he thought, if you're going to do a podcast that focused on fiction, not audiobooks, but fiction. And what's interesting is we've got this thing called medium equals audiobooks in the podcasting 2.0 namespace. And that is, great. And we have podcasts that are tagging themselves specifically as audiobooks. But there are podcasts that are still tagged as podcasts, medium equals podcast, that are fiction, that don't want to be an audiobook. And I said, what's the difference then? What's the difference between a fiction that's not an audiobook? And there is a minor technical difference. One's the way it's narrated, I think, and one's specifically designed as an audiobook. But outside of that, it was a very good piece. And I highly recommend anyone who is building apps to read it, because you need to be compliant.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just focusing on, there are different user experiences required for different types of content, whether that's fiction podcasting, whether that's audiobooks, whether that's music, and so on and so forth. And the Clever app is an app which deals with all of those different ways of UX, which is required. So yes, I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I worked with Barry from Podhome this week on medium equals courses. And again, very much like audiobooks and fiction, you have to set the tag to serial so that the courses appear in the right order. Oh, yes, and the final course first. Let's do that. No, that doesn't work. So, there are little nuances. The other interesting thing that came out this week was Dovidas from RSS Blue has released a test RSS feed where you can test whether your live streaming for value time splits works. This is critical. Most apps aren't supporting live value time splits. TrueFans, for example, doesn't support live value time splits. We support value time splits or wallet switching in the post-recording. That's fine. That's easy to do.
Yeah.
But live was, some weird WebSocket.
Much more complicated.
Yeah. So thanks to Dovidas, there is now a way of doing that, and we are working with it. It's a podcast tag called podcast::live value. And it uses a WebSocket. So we will try it.
If there is someone listening to this podcast that thinks, I'd really like to help the podcast community, but I don't know what to do to help the podcast community, one thing to do is to put a one page together of all of the test podcast feeds that exist. Because there are a bunch of them. John Spurlock, for example, has one that will read back the user agent of your podcast app for you. So there's a bunch of these test feeds, and I think it would be worthwhile doing that and to chuck that onto the Podcasting 2.0 website, which is going to become easier, so I hear, to produce work for. Daniel is busy looking at ways to make that easier to edit. So that would be a really helpful thing. Talking about test RSS feeds, I've actually got rid of one this week, the Pod Clock podcast.
No.
I know. Yes, my favourite thing, but I've got rid of that this week, partially because I realised it was costing me $25 in Amazon Polly every single month, and I was there going, you know what, I want to cut that bill down, and I'm not going to pay for Amazon Polly anymore. So yes, so that was one thing. But
I suspect that was Mrs. Cridland who said you're going to cut the bill down.
I don't think it was. I don't think it was. No,
okay.
I think it was me.
She doesn't know that.
I think it was me. And yes, and one final thing is Sonos. If you have a fancy Sonos speaker, apparently you have a new app which is there for you. And in that new app, they've managed to break virtually all of the integrations that they had with, podcast apps, Pocket Casts, for example, and various other things. And some people are very, very upset about it. And so it's a good job that I haven't spent any money on those expensive Sonos speakers, isn't it?
I didn't think they were still going. Well done to keep going.
Boostergrams and fan mail on the Pod News Weekly Review.
Yes, it's our favourite time of the week. It's Boostergrams and fan mail. You can send us a boost through your modern podcast app if it's got a boost button. You can send us a fan mail by clicking that link in our description thing. We like boosts better, but fan mails are also good. What have we had this week so far, Sam?
So a couple of fan mails came in first one from Alban Brook over in Jacksonville, Florida, betting on YouTube over Apple Podcasts to be the most important podcasting app is bold. Apple has supported podcasting for 20 plus years, while Google has shifted their podcasting strategy every few years. How likely is it that YouTube podcasts will exist in 2029? I'm just going to preface this on, you put out a tweet, which was, lol, do you remember Google Podcasts?
Yes. Yes, I did. Yes, I completely agree. So this was on the back of a piece of research last week where I think it was Chris Peterson asked what the most important podcast app is going to be in the next 5 years. And lots of dumb podcast executives said it's going to be YouTube. I'm trying to work out how rude I can be in my opening keynote for the podcast show next week about YouTube and the BBC.
They won't be there. It's 9 a.m. Come on.
And yes, completely agree with you, Alban. So yes, correct.
Cy Jobling from the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Yes. 12 points to Wyoming. How about trying a Buzzsprout fan mail for audience participation at your live show? We can do. That would be quite an interesting one, James, to try. It's frictionless and convenient if the push notifications are quick enough. We don't know how quick they come through, actually.
Yes, we can be, although this would be a bunch of people in the UK and we would all be asking them to text American text numbers, which may or may not be free in the UK. So I'm not so sure about that, but it's a good idea, Cy. Even easier is just to put your hand up and then we'll get a microphone over to you. That's the way that I'm planning on doing it. So yes, there we are. 5,150 sats from Dave Jones using Castamatic. Thank you, Dave. Does anyone receive money with these fan mails, or does it just cost everybody money, winky face? Correct, Dave. No one earns money in terms of the fan mail messages, which is why we prefer, Twilio gets some money, but that's it. So yes, completely agree. So thank you for your 5,150 sats, which is some kind of boost. And yes, point well made, I think. What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, no, I think... Look, I think fan mail was really fun. I think boosts are fun. So anything that makes interactivity works. No one's making money out of this. So the amounts that we make are micro. So I think you and I can afford to buy a beer out of our boost this year. We're okay.
Oh no, I think we've earned more than that.
Have we?
Definitely, yes. I think we've definitely earned more than that.
No, because I think I've given away hundreds of thousands. If you ever listen to the podcast show,
Friday
night,
that may be slightly different. That may be slightly different.
Yes.
Right, let's move on. 10,000 sats from Adam Curry, who's sent us a boost using Podcast Guru by the looks of things. Anyway, he says, female James for all daily shows, please. I think he was listening to a show that I did earlier on this week where I put my voice through this thing and turned into a female. And the quick answer is, Adam, no female James for all daily shows, or indeed for this show either. But thanks for the boost anyway, much appreciated.
Jemima Cridland.
I know. Weirdly, that voice is called Charlotte, which is the name of my daughter. So yes, I mean, even and she doesn't know anything like that.
Moving on then. Right. 1,000 sats from Creativity Found. Thanks for the little mention for Creativity Found with regards to pod rolls. A fine example of how podcasting 2.0 features can be used to aid discovery. Look forward to seeing you both at the podcast show in London and at Sam's online 2.0 event. Yes, look forward to seeing you there as well.
Row of Ducks from Cole McCormick. I'm about to spam your texting number with Star Wars quotes. Long live George Lucas. Cole, thank you. I think.
Didn't he sell it to Disney? He doesn't.
Yeah, he did. Lucas sold it to Disney. So yes, along with Doctor Who now and all kinds of other things as well. There we go. Brian Ensminger, 1,701 sats. Regarding transcripts in Apple Podcasts, I've had good acceptance of transcripts made with Mac Whisper, lightly cleaned up and delivered in SRT format, unless I include speaker labels. Well, yes, because you can't really include speaker labels in SRT format anyway. You should be using VTT for that. I think we made a mistake by saying that SRT was a thing. I think we should be using Web VTT from here on in. To be honest, it's the only one that I support these days. Yes, I would agree.
Yeah, we're switching over. As well.
Brian is also in the Hindenburg group in Facebook, and one of the things that Hindenburg has just announced is much better transcripts. And actually, one of the problems that I had editing this show in Hindenburg was if you did the transcripts first, it was really slow, because it was 90 minutes plus of matching words with WAV files. And yes, it was incredibly slow. And they fixed all of that as of the new build, which came out this week. So if you are using Hindenburg, do a quick update. One of the very nice things that they've done is if you do a transcript now, and maybe you've got a couple of different tracks. So maybe you've got maybe you've got two tracks that are 90 minutes long. The old Hindenburg Pro would have transcribed those separately, and that would have ended up being 3 hours worth of your transcript time gone. The new version, which you download this week, will only take 90 minutes out of your transcript time, and will do a much better job of doing that. So hurrah for them, is what I say. And we've got one final boost here from Andrew Grummett. It's a Row of Ducks boost, and it just says cheers. Well, cheers, Andrew. Cheers. So what's been happening for you this week, Sam?
There was a couple of things, really. One, I just got a sense or a feeling this week that something's changed. There's so many announcements this week about universities and schools joining the Fediverse, and it just felt very took me back to the early days of the web, really. It feels like the web's being reborn slowly, one server at a time or one instance at a time, and I posted that out and got a lot of positive reactions. I think when I look at the time I spend online with social media, I spend now nearly 80% of my time in the Fediverse, either on Flipboard, Threads, or Mastodon, or one of the ActivityPub clients that I use. I spend less than 5% of my time on X, very, very little. I get zero engagement there, particularly now. And 1%, I don't even go to Facebook or Instagram. It just feels very different, James. And I just thought I'd say, I think I'm watching the web reborn is what I feel like.
Yes, I certainly find much more pleasure out of the whole experience on the Fediverse, on Mastodon and those sorts of things. And I'm certainly getting, there's a bunch of very useful things that you can follow. One of the things that I particularly like is you can follow hashtags, which is very different to Twitter, where you can't follow a hashtag. You can follow a hashtag on Mastodon or similar, and that essentially means that if you want to follow the podcasting hashtag, then then you can do that. And you get whatever anyone is saying about that, and that's a nice thing. So it's worthwhile having a peek at. And there are a few things that you can do to make sure that if you're running a very small server, there are a few things you can do to basically pull in those hashtags from everywhere. Using other relays and things. But it's definitely a nice thing. Definitely a nice
I care
thing.
less about my follower numbers than, 10, 15 years ago. And it's really nice. I can re-pick the people I want to follow. It's good. I like it. As a big Paul Weller fan, I saw Paul Weller at the Sydney Opera House when I was down your way, James. The fan podcast is out on the 17th of May and his new album. So just on a Paul Weller fanboy note, I'm looking forward to that. And the other thing we did, in True Fans, we enabled the OG audio that you gave the nice little hint out. So that worked. We tested that. That's all working in the Messenger client now. And we're looking to support OG music and OG video now, James, to see if that makes any difference at all.
Well, there you go. There's a thing.
Now, the big thing we did do this week was we started enabling you to buy books, audio books or music albums with fiat currency. So with our Stripe integration, you can buy the audio book with the Aussie dollars or euros, but we convert that payment to the author back into sats so that we can honour the splits in their wallet. So a user...
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, so the user can buy it in whatever currency they want, or they can buy it in sats. They don't have to buy it in the fiat currency. They get a choice. But what we then do is we do the conversion in the back end, and then we look at the wallet splits, and then we just distribute the sats based on the wallet.
Very cool.
Yeah,
very
thank
nice.
you very much. What's been happening for you, James?
So I've been on two different podcasts this week, Bubble Trouble, which we mentioned earlier, which looks at the financial world of podcasting, and also Tony Doe's podcast, which is called Into the Podverse, which is a really interesting thing to get interviewed for, because essentially Tony sent through an email with a bunch of questions and said, record your answers to this and send me the MP3 file. So he calls it asynchronous interviewing. And and so I ended up doing that, and he's made a decent sounding show out of it, which I thought was a very clever way of doing a show.
I'll have to go and listen to that. The Bubble Trouble one, I as I said earlier, I highly recommend everyone going to listen to that show. It was very thoughtful. I thought right on the money in terms of where we are today in the metrics around podcasting. So good show.
And that's it for this week. Thank you to Sam, to Julie and to Jesse for being our guests this week. You can listen to the Pod News Daily in your podcast app, and you can subscribe to the Pod News newsletter. The podcast is good. The newsletter is better for more of those stories and much, much more too.
You can support this show by streaming sats. You can give us feedback using fan mail or with the Boostergram. We like both. If you're still using an old legacy podcast 1.0 app like Apple, Spotify or YouTube, what are you doing? Instead, grab a new Podcasting 2.0 app at podcasting2.org/apps. And we look forward to seeing you if you're at the London Podcast Show at our live recording next week.
Indeed. Our music is from Studio Dragonfly. We use Clean Feed for the way that we record this show. Our voiceover is Sheila D, and we are hosted and sponsored by Buzzsprout. Podcast hosting made easy.
Get updated every day. Subscribe to our newsletter at podnews.net. Tell your friends and grow the show.
And support us.
The Pod News Weekly Review will return next week. Keep listening.